Here we go. Today is Sunday, August 15th, 2021, and this is episode 258 of Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. How are you, sir?
So good it hurts. How are you?
I'm good. I mean, it's not a secret, but probably by about the time this publishes, well, it depends on if we get it out today. Tomorrow is my last day at my current employer. I'm moving on to new exciting pastures.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So I haven't publicized it too much yet because, respect to my current employer, but working on my 2 weeks and then start my new job at the end of the month. And so kind of excited about that.
Awesome.
And as always, for those who are concerned, I don't talk about my current employee situation or previous employee situations in any specific detail, because ethics.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But so that's good.
I guess it's probably a little late to say that the thoughts and opinions we express are ours and not those of our current or future or former employers.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So also thank you to our Patreon donors. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. You guys are awesome.
Much apologies for missing the past 2 weeks. I had unavoidable personal conflicts, primarily, by the way, moving both of my kids into their respective colleges. So
you're an empty nester.
I am officially an empty nester.
Is it like spooky quiet at your house? Do you hear ghosts running around now?
No, I have an old cat and a dog, so it's actually quite noisy still.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah,
but that's got to be weird though. After all these years, to have them both gone.
It definitely is. But they call anytime they want money, so it's all good.
True enough.
All right. So jumping into some stories. First one comes from Ars Technica. The title is Software Downloaded 30,000 Times from PyPL Ransacked Developers' Machines. Holy cow. I guess it's not PyPL, it's PyPy, isn't it?
I'm afraid to even try to pronounce it because...
PyPy.
Sure. We'll go with that. That sounds right.
Anyway, this is a kind of a fascinating emerging threat vector in the cyber world these days, and I say cyber specifically to anger some people, because I think that's fun,
including me,
including you. That's right. I can watch you get angry at me on the video here. So in this particular case, there were, I think, 6 different packages identified in this ecosystem that had a total of 3 or 4 different malicious additions to them. But I think these specific issues have since been addressed. But as a category of problem, they are becoming more common. We've seen quite a number of different high-profile issues. Most recently, there was a problem with CodeCov. We saw the issue with SolarWinds. Not saying that those were necessarily the results of additions through open source, but the net point is that as time moves on, lots of organizations are kind of adopting much more of a development mindset, and a big component of that, by the way, is often relying pretty heavily on open source. And there's, I think, a lot of legacy baggage around open source hygiene. I mean, we've as an industry, we've kind of had this untested assumption that open source is good quality, and there's the kind of the long-standing premise of many eyes makes bugs very shallow, right? But here we are.
We've had a few of these. Wasn't there a big SSL library that had a massive issue for 9 years or something?
It was Heartbleed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a really tough problem to solve, because people are going to grab these packages and reuse them. That's what they're there for. That's sort of like part of the philosophy of building other people's work and sharing the work. And it's so easy to obfuscate something malicious into submitted code, especially when it's a component of a bigger system. I don't know an easy solve on this one.
Yeah, they point out, by the way, one of the issues in one of the packages here, it actually would reach out to a external site and download some code from a third, from an external site that it would then run. So even if you were necessarily looking for malicious stuff, you might not actually see it if you're just simply looking at doing like a static analysis of the code on your system, unless you're specifically looking for things that did, that very thing.
And there's plenty of ways to obfuscate that with like time delay and.
So it's this is if you read the comments in this article, there's I think a lot of hand wringing. This is a difficult problem to solve, and a lot of organizations, they're relying on open source as kind of a force multiplier to be agile and nimble and whatnot. And now this kind of threat is this kind of threat vector is putting that that context or that concept in jeopardy. Maybe not jeopardy, right? But it's going to necessarily add some overhead depending on how we solve it.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes an issue of how widespread does this become, or is it an edge case? I mean, the only thing I could think of is we have this concept of like whitelisting applications so that non-approved applications can't run. I wonder if we need to get to a level of sort of whitelisting routines and behavior of subcomponents so they can't do things other than what we allow them to do. In other words, I'm downloading this to be a random number generator, but it also has this backdoor, but I'm only allowing it to run as a random number generator. I don't even know if that's viable, but I don't know. I don't know much other way you could stop this other than just treating everything as incredibly suspicious and just monitoring the heck out of any sort of odd behavior. But that is so labor intensive. I don't know. That's a tough one. That is a tough one.
I raised this without having a good answer. I mean, I think we're at kind of the bleeding edge here, and I'm sure there's plenty of vendors who will tell you that they have the solution, but I remain skeptical.
Yeah, and I don't think it's viable to say just don't use it. Code repositories. They're going to use it. They need to use it, and they're not going to be able to audit it. I mean, it's so easy to obfuscate. I don't know.
The only thing I can come up with is, trying to come up with some kind of a risk scoring, and applying kind of graduated inspection of different pieces of code based on risk, and that might be based on how many people use it or different parameters. There was the U.S. government recently released an executive order around security, and it somewhat touches into this area. It was the result of the big SolarWinds breach, and we've seen other issues too, which I would say this is like the problem here is part of a broader category of these supply chain attacks where the adversaries are going after development. They're actually attacking the development ecosystem rather than trying to break in through the front door of the network of their intended victims. They're coming in through the development channels, whether that's with Microsoft in their Exchange issues, or SolarWinds, or CodeCov, and so on. They're finding it easier to attack those, and by the way, it's a little more economical because if you can get in once, you can actually potentially create a a lot of impact. You can go after lots of different targets with one campaign. So
yeah, I think this is a tough one. I think
it's so difficult. We're going to move on to the next story, which is also from Ars Technica, and the title is "Feds List the Top 30 Most Exploited Vulnerabilities. Many are years old." So the government agencies from a couple different countries, U.S., U.K., Australia, put out a joint advisory encouraging organizations to go patch kind of this relatively short list of vulnerabilities that they see being commonly used in attacks, more sophisticated attacks. And it's disappointing because a lot of these are actually fairly old, or several years old. But they range from things like Pulse Secure. By the way, if you're using Pulse Secure, maybe think about something else. I don't know.
It's an incredibly popular VPN tool.
It's really, really popular, but holy cow, it's like a freight train of vulnerabilities. So,
the other thing about that is we often talk about isolating things from the internet. That's meant to be public facing,
like by design.
Yeah,
but that's the problem, right? And so if you're gonna use it, like you need to be hyper aware of what version you're on and whatnot. So not saying it's not a good product. I'm saying that like it has had a problematic history.
Do you think some of these are a lack of asset management, or just lack of awareness, or lack of just caring?
A bit of all of the above. I think I think that some things like the Pulse Secure, I'm just looking at the list, like Citrix, Pulse Secure, Fortinet, F5 are typically impacting devices that are often put into the environment and not patched. Like, a lot of organizations have very robust patching around things like Windows. And
often because that tools are built in, but yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they don't have it around the networky devices. And there's different reasons for that. Like if you reboot a server, a lot of times you can have failover, but if you reboot a network, if you didn't design your network right, if you reboot a network device, if you didn't design your network right, you could cause an outage. So right. I think there's some of that. Drupal is another one, and Drupal I think is one of the ones that would fall into that asset management problem. Like that's the kind of thing that somebody sets up on a web server, and nobody really knows that it's actually there. It's not its own piece of infrastructure. Same with Atlassian. It's interesting they call that NetLogin separately from Microsoft, but anyway, it's an interesting list to take a look at, because these agencies are pointing out this is the list of vulnerabilities that they see commonly being targeted. Not that other things aren't also being targeted, but like you should be applying a lot of focus in your environments. If you have these, really consider getting them.
Yeah. Low-hanging fruit that'll stop a lot of attacks.
Exactly.
Currently seen. And yeah, a lot of these are old. 2019, 2018, a couple from 2020, 2017.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not good.
Get on it. All right. Next story comes from securitywake.com. The title is Hospital Network Reveals Cause of 2020 Cyber Attack. So the University of Virginia Medical Center was the subject of an attack at the end of 2020. And at the time wasn't a lot of clarity exactly how it happened, but now some additional details came out, which I thought were quite interesting. Partly, particularly in COVID times, what happened was an employee, and I have to assume, I don't have this detail, but I'm totally speculating here. I have to assume it was somebody in an IT type role, was disconnected from their network at home I don't know, on vacation maybe, and checked personal email on their work laptop. And apparently one of the emails had a malicious attachment or link to something that anyway ended up getting that device compromised, and it just kind of was compromised until they plugged it in to their company network after their vacation was over, and then the attack propagated into the network. Anyway, the UVM indicated that they actually don't permit access to personal email if you're while you're connected to their network, but they hadn't prevented that when you're disconnected.
Yeah, because it probably is going through a web proxy when you're on the VPN.
Exactly.
And it's not when you're off the VPN unless you've configured that.
And so once you get compromised while you're not connected to the network, then you do. So this is one of the reasons you see some organizations have kind of this forced VPN concept where as soon as you come on the network, before you're able to do anything, it has to establish a VPN connection back to the mothership, and all of your internet traffic is routed through the organization with its screening and filtering applied.
Yeah, and what's kind of happening there is it's the cloud is evolving that with this concept called SASE, S-A-S-E, where you kind of take that concept of that data center and all the security controls and you push it to the cloud, on somebody else's infrastructure. And they've got an always-on VPN now to the SASE agent connecting to this vendor's cloud. And, a couple different vendors are doing this, but then they apply proxy, malware, sandboxing, firewalling, all that kind of stuff, regardless. Like you have to go through that first, whether you're connected or not. The other thing I was thinking about this story is the concept of whether or not you're permitting somebody on a company asset to access things like personal email. And, it seems like a no-brainer for a lot of folks hearing this story. Well, just block it. But I actually think that's a bit of a tougher call than it might seem at first. Certainly more tightly regulated and controlled places would block this. But there's a cultural battle around that, like how tightly locked down is a company asset. And, kind of like you see current battles about working from home and that sort of thing. There's this concept for a lot of employees and, some of the more desirable organizations to be not that locked down on their personal laptop. They don't want to not have local admin rights. They want to not, and they want to be able to access whatever they want to access. And it becomes a cultural battle, and do you keep your talent happy by letting them do these things, but they assume more risk? And that's a tough call, I think, that, probably needs to be discussed at a very senior level, because it's a philosophical debate that I think does impact the type of employees who want to work in your environment.
It was certainly true. But I think there's got to be other accommodations for that. Like I don't know that these are mutually exclusive goals. One of the things I had looked at one point, although at the time it was prohibitively expensive, but I suspect that things have changed now. There is, by the way, a practical need in many organizations to allow people to do things that they need to do, like
right.
Personal browsing or personal email, whatever. But there's potentially safer ways to do it than just say, okay, fine.
Well, I'm also curious what their endpoint security software was and how this blew past that, which is not that big a deal, or I shouldn't say not that hard, but I'm curious what it was.
Yeah, that's hard to say. I mean, there's no indication of what it was. A reasonable endpoint protection system would have seen that the system was compromised, even if it wasn't connected to the network.
I mean, if you believe their marketing, sure.
True. Yeah, I mean, by the way, there's no indication that this was like some sophisticated targeted attack. It looks like this was kind of a more of a targeted opportunity or target of opportunity, like
just a broad-based fish.
Yeah, it was just like commodity, commodity distributed malware that they got, the adversary got lucky here. But there's back to what I was saying. There's options, like you can run a unprivileged VM on a system that lets people do what they want to do, or a VDI up in the cloud, but there's depends on what you're trying to accomplish, what your budget is, what your risk tolerance is. There's lots of possibilities, but
it's almost like you're foreshadowing a story we have coming up.
Yes, indeed. So
that is premier podcasting talent right there. Let me tell you.
Absolutely.
You're worth every dollar the sponsors pay you.
All right. So with that segue in mind, we'll move to the next story, which is from CSO Online, and the title is Recent Shadow IT Related Incidents Present Lessons to CISOs. So obviously Shadow IT is nothing new, right? I mean, we've been talking about this, I think, since the show started, and it's been a problem for even longer. This is something that I think is becoming an accelerated problem in many organizations, because IT is becoming much more commoditized and much more easy to consume outside the context of a company. I mean, like there's just so many different easy to use services. I mean, from things as simple as online PDF converters, like that you might not even think about as like shadow IT, right? But, think about that. Like somebody goes and they take a sensitive company document and they upload it to a PDF conversion website. Well, guess what? That document is not yours anymore.
Every SaaS vendor could be shadow IT.
Yeah, every SaaS vendor. All of the file sharing services, all of the, I mean, you said it, like SaaS is covers lots of areas, but I mean, all of the different sales tools, HR tools. I mean, there's just a damn near infinite array of things that fall into this bucket. And if, one of the common points that this article raises is that, kind of like was stated in Jurassic Park, nature will find a way. Employees will find a way to get their job done.
If they're being compensated and measured on it, they're going to, and you've got a roadblock in their way. We've talked about this so many times over the years. Most employees, I wouldn't say all, but I would say most employees will find a way, and their leadership will allow them.
Yeah.
Because they've got to get their job done.
This is where I really think that a CISO and a CIO need to come together, right? Because this is not solely a CISO or security tower kind of a problem. Like this problem arises because the company isn't providing the tools its employees need. But then, on the other side, it's maybe not making the rules of the road as explicitly clear as possible either. So there's kind of a two sides of the story. But I really think a lot, at least in my experience, this manifests itself in most instances because the company or organization isn't providing the tools the employees need to do the jobs.
Yeah, I would agree. And they're not anticipating the needs. I mean, sometimes things change very rapidly. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of very easy to use tools out there that solve the problem. And, to most employees' eyes, they don't see anything wrong with that, especially if they've got their own budget and they've got a credit card. They're just solving problems and getting stuff done and knocking it out. What they don't understand, and it's really not their problem to understand, is what sort of risk that might be incurring to the company.
Right.
And, the advice in the article is pretty good. They talk about how you counter this as being the go-to for solutions, not being the Department of No, be willing to, partner with folks and find ways to solve their problems quickly. The problem I see with that advice, or the danger with that advice, is that you've got to have really smart staff with the time to quickly handle these types of requests and the autonomy to do it, and understand where the guidance that needs to be pre-established is. If they're opening a ticket and waiting 2 weeks for security to review something to get back to them, that's not going to work. You're not going to solve this problem. You've got to have really sharp people with enough free cycles that they can engage deeply to understand the business requirements, what they're trying to do, how they're trying to do it, why they're trying to do it, and help design a secure solution rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And not a lot of IT organizations have that capability, or IT security organizations. So, businesses are moving very, very fast. And if anything, they're getting much faster. So it's a tough problem. The other thing I have in my notes here that I found interesting is there's a number of vendors out there that, let's say you've got a web proxy set up, they'll scrub your web proxy logs to see what SaaS services are being consumed by your employees.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be very illuminating, and find out. But, then again, ultimately, I think it's up to the security teams to understand it, detect it, figure out what's going on, what potential risks are out there, if there's ways to mitigate those risks without destroying the usefulness. But really, it's probably up to leadership, right? They need to understand the risks being incurred by shadow IT, whatever it is, and decide if it's worth the productivity or not. We can't, if we as security guys just try to shut it down, we would not be there long. This I think this horse has left the barn. Now we're just trying to play catch up.
That's certainly true. And I don't think there's any objectively right answer that is universally true for all companies or all organizations.
Yeah.
It's going to be quite situational based on, what the organization values and what kind of risk profile they have and so on. But it is something that is accelerating away from us. And I do think we have to take deliberate actions to get this under control.
It also adds a lot of complexity that is the enemy of security in many ways.
Indeed. All right. So moving on to our next story, which comes from the National Law Review, which is not a common source of stories for us.
This story is right up your alley, though.
It definitely is. So title here is Another Court Orders Production of Cybersecurity Firm's Forensic Report and Data Breach Case. So we've talked about, it's probably been a year or more ago, in the wake of the Capital One breach. Capital One was ordered to produce a forensic report that was, nobody had really ever seen that before. Obviously, many organizations in the wake of a breach, they hire a Mandiant style company to come out and do an investigation, and that typically results in a report. And most of the time, that report is considered to be, covered by legal privilege. In the case of Capital One, the court disagreed with that and ordered the report to be turned over, and there was lots of hoopla that resulted from that. This is another instance of a similar type of thing. The company name here is Rudders, and they were breached some time ago, and hired a third party company to come out and do a investigation, and that resulted in a report in a lawsuit against the company as a result of the breach. The plaintiffs, did everybody did the normal discovery dance, and Rudders did not turn over this report because they considered it to be covered by legal privilege. Well, the court rejected that, and they rejected it for a couple of specific reasons. And it starts to get kind of down into the legal technicalities that basically this report was not created as as part of preparing for lawsuit, right? It was created, there was performed for other purposes. The forensic company was hired, as a result of the breach, not in preparation for the lawsuit, which is, the things that are typically covered by legal privilege are, guidance and counsel from your attorneys, not things that are kind of statements of fact about a particular thing. And so that was basically what the court found. And I will say this is a pretty big deal for a lot of organizations. We've now seen 2 data points, and I dare say we're going to continue to see this happening. Now that we've seen it twice, I bet you we're going to see it happening over and over again. Now they do actually give some practical advice on how to mitigate this, because look, for right, wrong, or indifferent, there are practical reasons why such a report should be protected by legal privilege. Not in all cases, by the way. That's Jerry's opinion. I'm not a lawyer. Don't even play one on TV. So there are recommendations, for ensuring that such a report is protected by legal privilege. And by the way, this is going to be controversial, and it will probably reduce the utility of the report. But again, the context of legal privilege is intended to cover a very specific kind of thing, not like to be protecting just general stuff that you don't want what you want somebody else to see. That's not the intention of legal privilege.
Yeah, because weren't some companies, when a breach happened, having their lawyer go out and hire the breach response team?
Yeah, well, so that's what this is. So if you go through their recommended steps, number 1 is retain outside counsel and consult with litigation counsel immediately after an incident occurs. Don't retain an outside vendor directly, but do so through outside counsel. So basically, the kind of the premise here is, and I will say one thing I should have said at the outset. This is really very U.S. centric, right? I know there's people listening to the show from all over the world. I think that many other jurisdictions around the world have the context of legal privilege with similar kinds of intentions and constructs. So,
and that concept being that communication between you and your lawyer are confidential.
Correct. At its core, right? If you are in legal trouble and you hire a lawyer, that lawyer is giving you advice, right? And you don't want the content of that advice to be part of what's on display in the court. And so that's how this concept of legal privilege, at least in part, how this concept of legal privilege comes to be. So, that's it's a reasonable thing. And I think most, maybe not most, but many countries do have a similar kind of concept, but there's going to be differences. So take it for what it is. So anyway, don't engage an investigator or a third party forensic company directly. Do it through your outside counsel. Ensure that the vendor sends the final report only to outside counsel, which is interesting because, as I said, doing this in a way that shields your report from disclosure law or just the discovery process is going to necessarily make it less useful to the organization. So hire different vendors, or at a minimum ensure that they have a vastly different agreement and scope of services specifically tailored to the report. Don't include the report in the scope of services before the incident, right? So, that was one of the comments of the judge was that, this organization had a pre-existing agreement with their forensic provider to provide a report in the event of an incident. And so how could the company assert that the report was the result of the lawsuit when the lawsuit hadn't happened yet? That's kind of part of what they're saying. Don't share the report with anyone except for legal purposes. Clearly differentiate between vendors' routine services, litigation-related services. One of the things as I was reading this, by the way, it occurred to me that I'm surprised that we don't see incident response companies like, let's say, Mandiant or their likes, and law firms, kind of becoming a one-stop shop.
Well, it's interesting to me how much like IT security advice can be looked at or overlaps with the concept of legal advice.
Absolutely.
In my mind, at least, you can boil it down to, hey, it's our job to advise what to do if a certain outcome is desired. Right. Yeah. Very similar to a lawyer. Like, yeah, you probably shouldn't stab that guy on camera. That would be bad for you.
Right. Yes.
But you could still go stab the guy on camera. I don't know. That's probably a bad example. But you know what I mean. It's just, obviously, IT security or cyber is so new that, and the legal profession is ancient. So, I don't know if these will ever be codified into laws, but it seems to me very similar.
So let's see. Don't share the report, share the report with as few people as necessary. If a report is also necessary for internal business accounting or regulatory purposes, have a separate sanitized report prepared. The report and the related work must be a legal expense paid for by the company's legal budget, preferably through outside counsel. That was also one of the observations of the judge.
Let me just restate: we're not giving legal advice. We're not qualified.
I'm reading this document.
Please don't sue us.
Document anticipated or potential threat of litigation early on, and take time to carefully select and prepare your 30 BC witness for the deposition, whatever the heck that means. There you go.
Well, it was in National Law Review, so it's meant for lawyers.
That's right.
Which we are not.
Which we are definitely not. But, again, don't assume that, you engaging a third-party forensics company, that the report is going to be covered by legal privilege unless you take deliberate action. That's the whole point of this. Talk to your attorneys. Don't assume.
This is why you're fun at parties.
I totally am. All right. So, final story. This one comes from SecureWorld.io, and the title is Suing the CISO. SolarWinds Fires Back. So, we've obviously talked about SolarWinds ad nauseum. Some SolarWinds investors have sued SolarWinds, the company, and as well as their CEO and their CISO. Now, basically, I'm summarizing, alleging what I would loosely call malpractice, and basically saying that in a couple of different points, that the company didn't do the right, didn't exhibit responsible security oversight. And so they use some specific examples from former employees, one of which was a strategist, and had complained that the company wasn't doing enough in a couple of particular areas with security. There was also the very public issue with the SolarWinds 123 password that's referenced in here. And so, the point is that I find it interesting that this is an example where it's not just the company that is being sued. It's also in this case, it's the leadership of the company. And it is hard enough to be a CISO. I think this is really, if this becomes common practice, I fear what we're going to see. But on the other hand, that's one side. On the other side, I think it will quite likely drive different kinds of behavior. In as much of being much more conservative, being much more aggressive, and
or at least documenting your recommendations and decisions by leadership to ignore them.
Yeah, to insulate yourself. Correct.
Yeah.
But even then, I worry about, even if you document that, are you still complicit? Like the fact that you're still there, do you still remain complicit in their eyes? I mean,
we'll go back to a lawyer, right? I mean, your lawyer could certainly fire you as a customer or a client, but a lot of times they don't, and they're not complicit in their customer or client's behavior. So, I mean, a CISO, and this is the tough part, right? I don't like this. And I'll go on record, because a CISO is not as in charge as a lot of people think they are. Now, in this case, you could show some negligence for things like that password, that sort of thing. Maybe. I mean, you'd have to prove that the CISO had the authority to affect that password policy and chose not to, right? As opposed to the admin team that doesn't report up to the CISO. I mean, there's just a lot of nuance here of where the politics and the authority and the accountability fall within the organization. Or does this drive a CISO demanding that authority and autonomy because now their butt's on the line?
Well, that was exactly where I was going.
How does that fight play out?
Exactly. So if we're establishing certain accountabilities, legal accountabilities for a CISO, that would say that they then have to have certain authorities, like they have to be able to do certain things, and I'm not sure that all organizations are there. I mean, I don't know. This is going to be an interesting one to play out, because obviously right now it's just a lawsuit. I mean, you can sue anybody for just about anything, right?
But it might get thrown out. They might say you don't have whatever the term's going to be for you can't sue that person.
Right. So
who knows?
SolarWinds has already asked for it to be thrown out, saying it's basically ridiculous. And, they kind of SolarWinds goes through a kind of a point-by-point refutation and saying, like, the SolarWinds 123 password, while yes, that was a thing, didn't contribute to the breach.
Did you just use the term refutation?
Maybe.
Wow, that's fancy.
I know.
They refuted it in a refutation. I'm impressed. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see, right? It's a tough one. It's a tough one for me. Also keep in mind that this was a malicious actor. This wasn't like, so we're pairing now a malicious actor taking advantage of potential negligence, not just the negligence itself.
Exactly. Where is the line of enough, right? So let's just hypothesize for a second. We say, okay, yep, they didn't do enough. SolarWinds didn't do enough. I'm not saying that is the case, but let's just hypothesize. Like, so yeah, there are allegations that the adversary here was super sophisticated. There's the often cited thing, and it's actually in this article too, about how there were 1,000 attackers as part of the group that went after SolarWinds. I don't know if that's true or not, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say it is. So, like, where is the line at which SolarWinds would have had to be in order for them to, be reasonable? Let's assume that no matter what SolarWinds did, they were going to get compromised because the adversary was just so freaking sophisticated that nothing they could have done, nothing SolarWinds could have done, would have avoided. Where's the line? Like, what is enough?
Well, just go out of business. That's your way to not be breached. Just don't be a business. No, you're completely right. And I don't know. And I don't know if I want to judge deciding that either.
Yeah, I don't know. I fear that over time we're going to have to create, I don't know if it's going to be law or case law, but there's going to need to be some kind of standards, because this is, again, I don't know where this case is going to go, but this is kind of crazy.
It's going to come from the breach insurance industry. They're going to establish best practices.
It has to come from somewhere. Because right now
But
there's no safe harbor. Like
but they're still going to be too vague. They're going to.
Well, you're right.
Such a
You're
technical. I mean,
You're
there's
right.
so many technical nuances that it's a mess.
Yeah, it's like the GDPR. You know, you just have to have state of the art security controls.
Why did I get into this?
What does that
Jerry,
mean?
you're depressing me. I'm gonna go drink. What you've done.
So, but you know, this is why I think it's a tough area, right? And as soon as we were to establish a, you know, unless it's so vague as to be worthless, as soon as we establish a set of best practices, they're almost going to, like, definitionally be out of date because technology moves so fast. So,
Right.
Gosh, I don't know.
I think we should just watch this one and see what happens. It certainly won't be the last one of these.
No, I can't think of another instance where a CISO has been specifically sued. Not that it hasn't happened, but I can't. None are coming to mind.
Well, you're a CISO. I give you till next Tuesday.
Damn, man.
I might sue you myself just for fun.
It is a little concerning.
Yeah, I imagine. I wouldn't want to be a CISO if this were to happen.
You know,
or you've got to, you know, somehow companies are going to have to, I think the term is indemnify their CISOs in some way, some sort of corporate veil around them in some legal.
Yeah, but even indemnifications, again, I'm speaking totally out of my lane here, but even indemnifications typically don't cover, you know, like gross negligence. And then you get back to the point of where is the line of gross negligence?
Yeah. Well, then you go to, can the CISO say, hey, the corporate insurance policy will cover any payout? I don't know. I don't know.
I hate this.
One.
I hate it.
And I'm not legally smart enough to know all the ins and outs of this one, other than just it's ugly.
I don't know either.
Let's just go.
We need to find a lawyer to come in here and
we don't do guests.
Straight. No, that's true. We don't.
As every day my email evidences, the PR people think we do, but we don't do guests.
Oh, they do, absolutely. So if you ever send us an email and we don't respond, it's because it got like hidden in the dumpster fire that is all of the PR people wanting to put their CEO on.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Anyway, so with that happy note.
Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday, everyone. No, look, you know, this is why we make the big bucks, right? This is why security is challenging. If it were simple and straightforward, they wouldn't need us. So, you know, maybe in 10 years' time this will be a different situation, but right now, it's not deterministic. It's not objective. There is no like clearly right, clearly wrong thing from a security perspective. But we have to do what we think is right, and be okay with that. It's my view.
Indeed, I agree.
So anyway, well, I think that's it for today. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks for listening once again. Thanks to our Patreon donors. You guys are awesome. You help cover the costs of our show, and believe it or not, you know, we intentionally stay sponsor free, so we don't have anybody editorializing or forcing us to have guests. So those Patreon folks really helped you cover the costs, and we thank you for that.
That's right. All right. If you want to follow Mr. Cal on Twitter, it's at Lerg, at L-E-R-G, and I'm at Malicious Link. And with that, we will talk again soon.
Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.